So I'd now like to welcome Professor Alastair Driver.
Would it be possible to have a go? Morning, everybody. Great pleasure to be here. Slightly different to the last talk I gave, which was at the Danish Nature Festival, People's Nature Festival, up in Aalborg. I was stood in the middle of a sandpit in a circus tent, and I had to sort of wheel around continuously to make sure I was engaging with the whole audience. It was a unique experience, but I much prefer this more formal arrangement. I'm here today to talk to you about rewilding as it's happening at this point in time in Britain. I have the great privilege of being the director of Rewilding Britain, which I've been doing for the last 6 years since leaving my job as head of conservation for the Environment Agency. I'm a lifelong ecologist. I led a very feral childhood in the Cotswolds and was brought up by a naturalist father. So I am a nerdy naturalist who wants to know what everything is and still doesn't, of course. And in the last 6 years, I've had the opportunity to take my career to what I would consider to be a whole new level, which is a level of ambition and scale that I've never experienced before, and it's a real privilege. So, given that you're having a conference to discuss rewilding the mind, I hope it's appropriate that I share with you what's happening at this point in time, particularly running through some of the myths around rewilding. There are a lot of myths out there, and I want to hopefully demonstrate to you, prove to you, that some of these myths are just that. And in so doing, I hope that will help to set the scene for your discussions and other presentations later in the day. Now, I'm really sorry, I have to leave at midday because I've got to go and do an interview in a studio in London, and that means that if anyone wants to speak to me, it's just the break after this session that I will have the opportunity to talk to you. So please do come and see me. And if you're interested in rewilding, please do follow Rewilding Britain in social media and myself, if you feel inclined, on Twitter. I only talk about positive stories. I don't get involved in arguments. There is so much good news out there that I've got enough to focus on just talking about great things that are happening. So the first, let's just make sure this works. Okay, that's not working. Do I have to point it in any particular direction? Technicians? Okay. What am I aiming at? Okay, technicians, are you able to change the slides if I ask you to? Try again. Thank you. I hope that was me. I don't know now. So, first of all, we've just got to get this out of the way. It's never an issue. To be honest, I've said this in hundreds of talks. But I feel I can say this. I'm a lifelong conservationist, 44 years as a professional. I've been doing traditional nature conservation all my life. And the simple truth is, it's not enough. It's not enough. We are going backwards. All the wonderful nature reserves, protected sites, stewardship schemes, wildlife gardening, nature-friendly farming, it's not enough. We need to do more to reverse the decline in biodiversity and to tackle climate change. That doesn't mean we give up on all those things. We need all of that stuff. Definitely. Got to keep going on that, doing that more and better. But we need something else additional as well. And that something else is rewilding, and as far as I'm concerned, and that is the large-scale restoration of ecosystems to the point where nature is allowed to take care of itself. Now, there are lots of things I need to qualify there, not least what do we mean by large-scale, and that varies depending on where you are in the world, but just, and it's slightly arbitrary, but just so you're aware of roughly the sort of scale we're talking about in Britain, at the moment, We are in England, we are calling large scale only 250 acres plus. That is roughly the sort of size of unit where you can expect to restore the ecosystem using large herbivores, for example, in a situation where you're intervening relatively little. But that's a fairly arbitrary cutoff, but that's based on experience so far, so that's where the moment I'm drawing the line in terms of sites that I will visit. Ideally, they would be way bigger than that, thousands of acres. And to the point where nature is allowed to take care of itself means that, you know, you have to think about the spectrum, which I'm going to cover in a minute. But, you know, we need to start moving in that direction. Now, we then have to realize the baseline that we've got. Sorry, this is changing slides now without me doing it. I'm going to try go back. It's going forwards rather than back. Sorry, folks. I'll get there in a minute. Okay. So the first thing is to remember the baseline that we've got. Because we've been brought up in an environment that is heavily degraded, and that's what, you know, that's what it was like for quite a lot of us many decades ago. We assume that that's the way it should be. I travel the length and breadth of the country as part of my job, visit hundreds of sites all the time. And most of these images in this talk are mine, and I've got plenty of images that look like this, of our national parks, our jewels in the crown, that are actually very heavily degraded. Now, there are some wonderful parts of our national parks, no doubt, but there are large areas which are very barren, and I describe it as a garden. It is gardening. We have gardened every square metre of this land for a very long time, and some of it has suffered as a result. So quite a lot of it looks like this. And if you look at this wildness map, dark green represents a higher degree of wildness, and you can see pretty much all of the national parks in England and Wales don't have any truly wild land. The other interesting aspect is the loss of species. And I show this slide not to have a go at gamekeepers, but to demonstrate to you the wealth of apex predators that were present in this land historically. This is a list of gamekeeper kills from a 3-year period in a Scottish estate back in the 1800s. Just look at those numbers. Just look at 106 polecat, 198 wildcat killed, 285 buzzards, 63 goshawks, 27 white-tailed eagles. Incredible numbers. Just imagine the food pyramid that underpinned that sheer number of apex predators. Just imagine that wealth of invertebrates and seeds and small mammals and small birds and plants that supported that incredible, huge apex. That's what we've lost. That's what we've forgotten in the last 100, 150 years or so. Also, really interestingly, look at fox and magpie at the bottom of those columns. Look how small those numbers are. That's because in removing those apex predators, when they had those apex predators, those mesopredators were under control by the apex predators. As soon as you remove them, these mesopredators, generalists, great, incredible, versatile generalists, suddenly take over and exploit the situation. So we've created this situation where we have corvids and foxes in historically all-time high numbers. So the spectrum. Rewilding is a spectrum activity. I'm not trying to impose on you what you call rewilding and what you don't. But ideally, if we are going to move to a point where nature is taking care of itself, then we need to be reducing the amount of management, and we need to be increasing the project size. And so at the moment, most of our big nature reserves, special sites, etc., are up in the top left-hand corner of this graph. They're heavily managed, quite costly management, and still relatively small. We have now growing clusters of rewilding sites in the bottom left-hand corner, some bigger sites moving towards the middle. We basically need to be, over time, moving more of our best sites into the middle of that graph. There's no chance of us getting right down into the bottom right-hand corner in many parts of southern Britain because we just don't have the space. But just moving to the center of that graph is a major step forward for us. So that's what Rewilding Britain and other organisations seek to do, is to try and encourage landowners to think bigger, to join up with each other, and to gradually, over time, take the foot off the gas in terms of management. Now, I talk about the spectrum. You're not going to get a talk to an audience like you folks without me mentioning Chelsea and our success at Chelsea this year in winning gold medal and best in show for the Rewilding Garden. It was not our, certainly from a Rewilding Britain perspective, we had no expectation of doing that. We simply wanted to showcase the value and beauty of native plants, and we wanted to showcase what beavers can do for a water and wetland environment. Alan, Adam and Lou and their team did an absolutely amazing job, and hopefully it will get a mention later in the day. I said earlier I'm a nerdy ecologist. When I went to inspect the site, because it was basically me that had to sign it off, when I went to inspect the site 6 days before opening, I struggled to find anything that hadn't been done right. And then when I visited the site and helped man the garden on the Friday, I was then again looking, to see what plants were where and how everything was juxtaposed. And, oh no, you couldn't put lady smock there. It wouldn't exist in that water area. I couldn't find a single thing that was wrong. So absolute credit to the sheer quality and attention to detail of that. And it was truly mind-blowing, the amount of attention it drew. I've never experienced anything like it. Interesting experience on the side. Monty Don, as you possibly know, has been quite critical of rewilding. I managed to have a fantastic 50 minutes with him, one-to-one, around the back of the BBC Porter cabin, talking through his misunderstandings, misconceptions, concerns about rewilding. I'm not saying he necessarily still supports it, but hopefully I got across some of the key messages and conveyed what it actually is in reality, and not the myth of wolves and bears and land abandonment. But an amazing experience, and hopefully helped people understand that there are things they can do at very small scale that helps us to move a little way up that spectrum. Now, rewilding is a word that it's really interesting. When I started 5 years ago, it was a word that people said, well, you can't use it, it's toxic. And we continue to use it because there is a clear definition and there are a clear set of principles. Now it's a word that is probably overused and used to describe a whole range of things beyond those principles. But I just wanted to quickly run through these. And the first one is probably the most important one of all. People are absolutely key to this. We, as a species, belong in the natural environment. We belong here just as much as any other species. The challenge is, can we be there without impacting detrimentally on everything else? Secondly, as I've already discussed, size matters. The bigger the scale you're operating at, the more likely it is you are going to see ecosystem change. Natural processes prevail, and I'll give you an example of what I mean. Rivers, which is my background. If you have a river that is flowing through a landscape, naturally connected to its floodplain, unimpeded through dams and weirs and barriers, with no pollutants and unnatural levels of sediment flowing into it, with natural vegetation in the catchment, then natural river processes are prevailing. There is no impact of man on that. That's a big if, though. All of those are very big ifs, because, of course, we have a very heavily managed river environment in this country. But that's what we're aiming for, is to restore the ecosystem back to the point where all of these human interventions no longer have an impact. It's very much a long game, marathon with a sprint start. The sprint start is lots of intervention, where appropriate, to kickstart this recovery. It's not about walking away. In the vast majority of cases, it's not about walking away and just letting it go. It's about kickstarting that recovery. Because we've degraded so much, and we haven't got much time as a climate emergency, biodiversity crisis, we need to act now to intervene. So absolutely essential that we consider intervening, and I'll come on to interventions later. And when you talk about rewilding, people say, oh, you're turning it back to the Pleistocene. No, rewilding, just think about rewilding as meaning wilding again, making it wild again. But we need to do that in a way that's fit for future climate, fit for future human pressure, etc. So those are key principles, and when I travel the country by invitation to visit projects, I'm assessing them with those in mind. And if they tick those boxes, then as far as I'm concerned, they're rewilding. Rewilding Britain has an ambition for 5% core rewilding in this country. That's a long way off. We're probably at around 1%. But we're not talking about rewilding everywhere. You will hear, oh, we can't feed the world if we rewild everywhere. No one's talking about that. We're about 1% at the moment. We can easily achieve 5% without impacting on, for example, on food production. That's easily doable. But we've got a long way to go. And you hear this talk of 30 by 30, 30% of the land, in nature recovery by 2030. We would see that 5% fitting with another 25% of high quality nature, but with lots of other land uses incorporated into that. Now, I'm going to run this a couple of times. This is an example of what it looks like in southern Britain. These are just Google Earth images of the Knepp estate, a section of the Knepp estate in Sussex. And you'll see how the landscape changes. So you start with an arable field, good hedgerows with lots of seeds and fruits, and exclusion of large grazing animals. So there are fences around these arable fields to start with. This is a 15-year time frame that we're looking at here. And the only other thing that they did was break up the land drains in this landscape. So you will start to see water sitting on the land. So you're starting with bare arable fields, but good hedgerows, oaks and ash, and lots of thorn, buckthorn, blackthorn, hawthorn, bramble, dog rose, etc. So quite a lot of seeds and fruits. And of course, they've got great vectors for spreading these things, various species of birds, particularly jays and squirrels, etc. So I'll just run the clip again, and you will gradually see scrubs starting to appear. This is all natural regeneration, just within a few years. Then water sitting on the land. Then you'll start to see turbidity in that water because the animals are being let in halfway through this time frame. And now you see quite a lot of woodland, you see scrub and wetland, and you still see open grassland. And there are still lots of areas of open grassland at Knepp. Now, that's one of the most famous examples, but we now have a growing number of rewilding sites that you can visit around the country. We set up, at Rewilding Britain, they set up the Rewilding Network 2 years ago, under 2 years ago actually, and we already have over 70 large-scale projects showcased on there. And you can go onto that site on a map and see which sites are near you. And a lot of these sites virtually all of them have public access. And we also have something like getting close to 1,000 landowning members now on this network. So from scratch, it's increased in size significantly. For me, I was very keen that we set this up because many years ago, nearly 30 years ago, I helped set up the River Restoration Network, and that has done similar things in terms of bringing people together, running big conferences, sharing best practice, running webinars. The Rewilding Network runs webinars on different topics every month, and the contributors come from people who are actually doing the work on the ground, which is fantastic. So I'm coming now to give you some of the facts, details, and information about the projects, which I hope, again, will help shape discussions and thoughts later. So I travel, part of my role is to travel the country by invitation, advising landowners. And when I do that, assuming they do want to go on the rewilding journey, it's not always obvious. Sometimes they're hesitant, they just want to know more about it. Sometimes they've already started, actually, they're already on that journey. And sometimes they just need a bit of help to get over the line, as it were. I then gather information from them about their project before rewilding and during. And I've now got a significant amount of data that I can summarize. And that's what's providing quite compelling evidence now, which I use in the other part of my day job, which is to influence government on policy and funding. So we've got nearly 40,000 hectares worth of rewilding data. And just to give you a quick run through some of these key things. So you might get the perception that it's all rich, big private estates. Not at all. It's about a quarter by area are big estates. That is almost exactly the same proportion as the ownership of rural land by private estates. So it's proportionate. Government agencies, water companies have got a big part to play, and the NGOs, of course, are doing a lot. The Wildlife Trust, RSPB, National Trust, etc. The bigger sites are in the uplands, as you would expect, and that's 62% by area, so 2/3 approximately are in the uplands by area, but 2/3 by number are in the lowlands, so more sites in the lowlands, but smaller. By the way, as you probably noticed, as I'm going through this presentation, I'll show you examples of different projects that are on the Rewilding Network. I won't be talking about quite a lot of them, but just to give you a flavour of what's out there. Now, I talked earlier about herbivores. I mentioned it. We would naturally have had bison, elk, beaver and boar, or ancestors of cattle and ponies in this country, historically. And our vegetation grew up with those herbivores in the landscape, and those herbivores grew up with wolf and lynx and bear and eagles, etc., in the landscape, helping to control them. Now, we've wiped out the apex predators, and we've wiped out most of the large herbivores as well, although we are now starting to see the return of beavers and wild boar. But in the absence of those, we've got two choices. Either we just leave it and have no herbivore impact, or we say, well, we'll go for the next best thing. How close can we get to the same trophic impacts? And the next best thing are rare breed cattle and pigs and ponies, etc. So we've seen that most of the rewilding projects are utilising cattle. In fact, the cattle numbers have gone up overall across all rewilding projects. What's decreased are the sheep numbers. Sheep numbers have plummeted because sheep have a very significant impact on vegetation. They will selectively take out any or most of the wildflower species, and they reduce the sward. If they're intensively used for prolonged periods, which is the norm, then you will see, billiard table grassland. So reducing sheep, but actually replacing them with small numbers of cattle in big areas is the way it goes. And the livestock units overall are approximately half of what they were when the land was farmed. So it's not no food, it's not no livestock, it's approximately half. And this brings us to this great myth, we can't feed a growing population if we rewild everywhere. Well, I've already explained there's still food being produced from this land. All of the sites are on very marginally productive land anyway. But for me, the massive elephant in the room is food waste. The 40% food that we already waste. That's gone through the whole process of production. All that expense of time, effort, blood, sweat and tears, carbon, soil, water, etc. 40% is wasted. If we're serious about food risk, food security, that's what we need to be tackling. And then, of course, we have changes in meat-eating habits and food technology, etc., which are no doubt going to swing things as well. But although it's the one you'll see in the media all the time, it's actually a complete non-argument when it comes to rewilding in this country. I'd like you to run the video now, chaps, on this. They need to control the video for me. We need big herbivores in the landscape, and I just wanted to show you this example. Pigs at Knepp, they are making a big difference to the mosaic effect in that ecosystem. Believe it or not, these pigs here are feeding on freshwater mussels in shallow water. Isabella Tree has even told me she's seen them diving in the lake, like hippos to pick things off the bottom. Unbelievable. But they are a major contributor, for example, to the turtle dove recovery, because they have exposed bare soil around the water bodies where rare plants are producing seeds that the turtle doves feed on, and the hedgerows there are fantastic, so the turtle doves nest successfully. So this is just one example of this proxy herbivore activity. This is, wild boar would be doing this, but we don't have wild boar in all the places we should have. And so these next best things, in this case Tamworth pigs, are doing that instead. Just a quick point on site designations. People, you might think that you can't rewild in protected sites. Actually, that's not true. Over a third of the rewilding area on the Rewilding Britain network are in protected sites. Natural England are becoming more flexible with this, understanding that rewilding can actually improve those special sites even further. And you don't give up on the really special bits. That's the other really important aspect. If you've got high-quality wildflower-rich hay meadow in a rewilding landscape, you don't give up on that and allow it to be scrub-dominated. You make sure you keep managing that whilst rewilding other areas around it, in order that the species, these high-quality nature-rich meadow species, may spread out into other parts of that landscape in time. So about 2% overall of these rewilding sites are still managed. So a quick word on interventions. I've got 25 different interventions now on the list, and the crucial thing is that, one thing you have to be doing is allowing natural regeneration of vegetation. If you're not doing that, then you're not allowing natural processes. So that's a given. And then there are many other interventions. Tree planting, for example, is happening on approximately half the sites. Natural regen should be the default option, and in the warm and productive southern parts of Britain, generally speaking, natural regeneration will be enough. But in some of the sites I'm familiar with in the north, we do need to plant. Like this site, I'm a private advisor for Broughton Estate in Yorkshire. We planted 250,000 trees there because it's a completely barren, open, formerly sheep grazed landscape. So yeah, a lot of tree planting in cases like that. And then a whole variety of other things. But for example, removing internal fencing and infrastructure is all part of contributing to the feeling of wildness. This infrastructure doesn't necessarily per se stop natural processes prevailing, but if you want people in that landscape and you want them to feel that it is a wild landscape, so removing infrastructure is important. And removing fence is obviously important when you want grazing animals to be roaming over much larger areas anyway. Species reintroductions, you will hear a lot about, lynx and wolf, for example, and obviously beaver. But there are actually a huge number of other species that are being reintroduced that you probably wouldn't be aware of. I've got a list of nearly 50 species now that are being considered by these projects, and even all the way down to mycorrhizal fungi to help get the soil condition back to where it should be. Popular ones are beaver, and the situation with beaver, as you may know, beavers are fantastic ecosystem engineers. Our Chelsea garden obviously helped to demonstrate that. They can transform a wetland landscape. You will have probably seen photos online of wonderful green floodplains with beavers inside an arid landscape. So beavers are the real classic keystone species, and they are, as a result, top of the popularity list. Very charismatic animals as well. So they contribute quite a lot to the ecotourism aspects. But there are many others besides that we're working on latest one that's come to me, for example, is northern pool frog, which there is now a reintroduction program expanding in this country at the moment. So, this is just one intervention, though. You might hear about reintroductions, and people sort of more or less equate that to rewilding. But, that's just one of nearly 50 interventions that one might consider. So these just a few examples of the common ones. And I have to say, for me, I've been involved in beaver reintroduction discussions since 1987, when I was first consulted about the possibility of reintroducing them in the Thames. And that never happened, well, not deliberately anyway. I could not believe my eyes when I went to the Forest of Dean and saw the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, release a beaver into the Forest of Dean enclosure. That, for me, was a seminal moment in my career of trying to influence politicians, because sure enough, that literally opened the gates. And now we are in a position where beavers are about to become a protected species on the 1st of October. And after that, the government will then consider reintroductions into the wild. Having said that, we already have 8 wild beaver populations in England, so it's kind of happening anyway. But we'd rather it happened in a proper strategic manner. A really interesting reintroduction angle that I've come across now is the development of connections with alpine plant societies at Haweswater in Cumbria, where they are, having removed sheep from the high fells, they are now seeking to reintroduce alpine plants to some of the crags. They've got some plants with literally just 1 or 2 specimens remaining in the wild. And so some of these, like the species I'm showing here, like pyramidal bugle, now being grown on, and there's this wonderful partnership with horticultural alpine plant societies forming there, and they've got their own nursery there, etc. So there's lots of spin-offs that are starting to appear from these projects. And these spin-offs are part of the diversification that goes with rewilding. So pre-rewilding, 25 sources of income, now nearly half again. And you will see these examples here from rewilding projects around the country: education, niche products, food and drink products, ecotourism, very, very popular, health and well-being, etc. And this graph here shows you the changes in the income sources, the key changes. So I've got a list of income sources in the left-hand column, and then before rewilding in black text, the numbers of sites that were utilizing those sources of income before they were rewilding. So it's mainly when they were traditional farming. Sorry. And in the right-hand column, those sites numbers shown in green are where the number of sites have increased, and those in red where they decreased. So you can see fewer landowners are accessing basic payments. The basic payment scheme, where you get money for farming per hectare, and more accessing stewardship, more are producing beef, fewer producing lamb and crops. But at the bottom, you'll see this is where the massive change is camping, glamping, nature tourism, education, etc. And also the accessibility to large grant schemes, government incentive schemes, lottery fund, etc. So this is how these people are making it pay. And although all of the private individuals are wanting to rewild because it's the right thing to do, and they want to leave their land in a better condition for future generations, they are nevertheless mindful of the bottom line. They still need to, often they will say to me, well, we just need to make sure it pays its way. They often have, it's often typical that they will have large properties and lots of land, and the property is a big sink for cash. So they've got to make sure that the land at least breaks even, washes its face. Now, one of the most compelling bits of evidence that then stems from this diversification are the jobs and the volunteer numbers. So jobs have gone up by 65% on rewilding sites compared with traditional farming beforehand. And that's not really that surprising, because farming is a relatively low jobs per hectare activity. But it's the diversification that leads to this, and the multiplicity of funding sources. So that's very compelling for government, of course, being able to present to that. These are basically green jobs in rural environments, often where it's challenging to find employment locally. But I hasten to add, not just in rural environments, we are starting to see urban projects coming on stream. And then also, equally importantly, a massive increase in volunteer engagement, 1,400% increase in volunteer engagement. And again, that's through the diversification of activities on the site, the fact that people get the opportunity to work in interesting, beautiful places. And I've been talking to some of the fellow speakers last night about this. One of the areas we're missing in terms of evidence of ecosystem service benefits from these projects is the health and well-being angle. And I would love to have contact with anyone who's got any form of data on the benefits of volunteer engagement in healthy, natural environments. You know, there is definitely a project out there waiting to happen where you measure, you try to measure that for individuals who suddenly start becoming engaged in a large project. Desperately needed, because we haven't yet, in my view, made that truly integrated join up with the health service and the natural environment. And that's the bit that's missing from the evidence packs that I and others are working on at the moment. So lots of monitoring going on, but it's mainly associated with biodiversity, soils, carbon, water quality, etc. And the individual sites will sometimes forge links with universities. If you're near any of the sites, and I would encourage you to look at the map on the Rewilding Britain website if you're interested in this, take a look at that map and try to engage with those sites, because a lot of them are seeking volunteer activity as I speak. They're ready, willing and able to accommodate people who would like to get involved in those sites. And often, a lot of them are very early stage, so it's good to be involved at baseline stage. We know about, of course, a lot about biodiversity benefits of rewilding from the likes of NEP. Fantastic stories there. Biggest purple emperor population in the country, from nothing to start with. Large numbers of turtle doves, nightingales, etc. Just an amazing success story in 15, 20 years. Now, I'm going to ask the guys in a minute to run this video. By the way, chaps, I need to give you a heads up that I will need sound on this if you've got it. Thank you. So when I talk about winning hearts and minds, this is an interesting one for me, because when I cast back in my career, when I started I was the first conservationist for the Thames catchment, working for the Thames Water Authority pre-privatisation, and that was a big job. There was just me and my dog and 3,000 engineers doing things that could be damaging to the environment. Building pipelines, reservoirs, sewage works, dredging rivers, building flood defence schemes, sea defences in the Thames estuary. There was a huge amount of stuff to try to cover. And I had to think, right, how do I pick my battles? I need to focus obviously on the areas where the biggest impacts are happening. I also need to try to find people who might be supportive and might then become the spokespeople for my subject, even though they're nothing to do with my department. And if there are loud people who are basically spouting myths or shouting aggressively about what we're trying to do, and believe me, conservation in the water industry 40 years ago was at a time when, why don't I go and get a proper job kind of attitude. That's the way it was. So there were people who were anti-change and said we need to keep dredging the rivers the way we always have done, because that's the way we do it. So I had to then also try to tackle the people who were outspoken. even though I'm never going to win them over necessarily, we need to try to calm the noise down because it was getting in the way. Now, it's similar in this rewilding world now. There are quite a few loud voices shouting for rewilding, and there are quite a few loud voices shouting against it. Now, I wouldn't necessarily go and tackle all of those, but those who are influential, it's worth having a conversation with. So I have gone out of my way, for example, to go and see Minette Batters, the president of the NFU. The first meeting I had in this job was with the NFU policy team, because I knew that that's where the biggest challenge is going to come from. Now, I'm not saying I'm necessarily winning their hearts and minds, but at least, hopefully as a result, they will have a better understanding of what rewilding is, and they will accept it has its place. And Minette has even said that she accepts it has its place, which is great. The other day, it was 3 weeks ago, I was in North Wales, covering sites in North Wales, and I was quite close to this guy, Gareth Wyn-Jones. Now, he's quite vocal on Twitter. And by coincidence, he and I were on a program called The Moral Maze on Radio 4 a few months ago. And it was a bizarre experience. You get grilled. You're not allowed to speak to each other, so you just get grilled independently by people in the studio. And I just talked about the stuff I'm talking about today. I just tried to tell the good news. Gareth, by his own admission afterwards, he lost it. And, under this rather sort of academic cross-questioning, he just lost it. And he said, "You're sitting there in your ivory towers, drinking your oat milk lattes. You haven't got a clue what's going on in the countryside." And that was it. That was his angle, basically. if in doubt, just fight back, you know. And I thought, this guy's quite a character, but he's still pushing stuff out there in social media that is basically having a go at rewilding and saying it doesn't have its place. So I was visiting North Wales, so I thought I'll go and see him. So I rang him. I texted him, and could we come and have a chat? And he said, yeah, come on. He said, I got to check with the wife first, but wife said yes. So I went to see him, and this is just a short. He likes to do these video clips, so he put this online. But that was a massive step forward for me, because for 2 years he and George Monbiot have just been having a shouting match, you know. And I've stayed out of it, but I thought I will actually just go and talk to him. So if you can run it, guys, for me, hopefully.
Well, you know, I bring people up here every day, and today somebody's had a special, independent, immersive tour. What were your thoughts? Oh, I'll introduce yourself first, Alastair.
Hi, I'm Alastair Driver. I'm the director of Rewilding Britain. So don't tell anyone that we're talking.
Yeah, you can't believe that I bought the director of Rewilding. Do you know what? We've had an amazing morning, haven't we?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, there's some fantastic things. This is, for what I would describe as good, standard, nature-friendly farming up here. And I talk about rewilding, that's what I focus on, obviously. Director of Rewilding Britain, that's what I do. But I've worked for 40 years in conservation, and I know that we need lots of nature-friendly farming and a bit of rewilding to complement it. And together, we can turn things around.
You've seen quite a lot of nature this morning, haven't you?
Yeah. No, you've got a great site here. You've also got stunning views, which
helps. Which helps with the immersive tours to bring the old Americans in. Ding, ding. No, didn't mean that.
You've got amazing archaeology. This area here, where you've got this mix of rushy, swampy areas, the gorse, the heather, the rougher grassland where the grazing intensity is lower. Fantastic. And then, yes, I've seen other bits where the grazing intensity is higher, but you've explained to me, you move the sheep on. When you notice it's getting like that, you move them on. And we'd love to see more shepherding, good old-fashioned shepherding skills, to move animals around in a way that is replicating what the wolf does, because it scares, it scares.
Well,
you've
just seen the wolf going off on his quad now. That's my dad. The big bad wolf.
The Wolfmeister General.
But all jokes aside, I think it's important that we have these conversations and we're discussing these things, because without these discussions and conversations, we'll never go forward. So it's important to engage and, you know, talk our differences through and maybe find a middle ground.
There's plenty of middle ground. Plenty of middle ground.
There you go. Living the dream.
I was a bit in trepidation of going to, you know, I mean, it's his facts, his hill farm. Then his dad comes over. His dad was amazing, like 85, looked fit as a fiddle. And, you know, I was sort of into the lion's den, but actually, you know, it went really well, as you can tell. That's the way it was. He's a good character. And I couldn't believe it. Last week, I was on a site in Cumbria, and he retweeted one of my tweets. Now, that is a tiny, tiny action, but it speaks massive volumes. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be, like I say, he's not going to be shouting about he'd get assassinated if he did in where he is in Midwest North Wales. But the fact is, he understands a bit more about it. I understand a bit more about what he's doing. He's doing great things, by the way, good nature-friendly farming, and it's a step forward. So, you know, it's really important when we talk about rewilding our minds, we've got to engage with others who may be antagonists in order to do that, because it helps us develop our thinking. Just finally, if you want more on this, and I'm sure many of you will have seen these books, but these for me, I mean, there's so much out there now. You know, I seem to be the only person in the rewilding world who hasn't written a book, but these are the big three for me, and I would suggest reading them in this order. Wilding first, the NEP story. Rebirding, which is packed full of data and information about what we had in terms of nature and how we can turn that round. And then Wildfell, which is the story of Haweswater, wild Haweswater, which I showed an image of earlier in my presentation, from the guy who is the warden of the site. Three fantastic books. All of them have won awards, and you know they tell the story beautifully between them. I'll leave you with this cartoon, and I am happy to take questions because we do have time, don't we, Eric? I'll leave you with this cartoon. This is an example of how we need to free up our thinking from some guys who are obviously releasing loads of pheasants to shoot with no consideration of what impact they might have on the environment. They can't reintroduce the beaver. It will really disrupt the natural order of things. We've got to move away from that way of thinking. Thank you.
Wow, you've packed that in. You got us thinking, that is for sure. Okay, I'm going to start with some questions. Obviously, I have to remember that this is not an in-conversation, so it's not a, you know, it's got to keep to the script. Okay, I'm going to start with the first question, actually, because I don't have 250 acres. I just don't. Sorry. And it doesn't mean to say that I don't want to be interested in the conversation. Obviously, people know that I hopefully are representing the tiny garden fraternity out there. So how can I make a difference? Okay, so I have a tiny garden, and I live in a village community, Sonning in Berkshire. And I'll just tell you my story about how I'm trying to make a difference. So, first of all, in my own garden, the number one thing I have to have is a garden pond, a wildlife pond, running drainage off the roof, with a boggy area adjoining it, so the liner goes underneath a bit of the lawn as well, and the wetland plants in that. And then I go for drought-tolerant, pollinator-rich plants in my borders, and I learnt a bit yesterday, obviously at Beth's place. I was photographing a few that I don't have. So I'm doing my little bit within my own garden. But also, you know, there are a lot of people here, I'm sure, like yourself, who, you know, could influence further than that in their own neighbourhood. And so outside of my garden is, sadly, Reading University farmland, which is really barren. At the moment, it just looks like the straw-covered plain fields here. But I managed to persuade them to give up a 10-metre buffer strip all the way along an 800-metre stretch of road. I managed to raise the money to plant trees in it. They wouldn't have done it if the money hadn't come with it, but they have done it, and that's a little step forward. So then there's a connection to my garden. Yeah. The next project I want to do is talk to my neighbours about hedgehog-friendly, you know, hedgehog streets, you know, where you put holes in fences, all that stuff. Yeah, so if we as individuals
seek to maximise the wildlife benefit of our own place, and you'll hear lots about that, no doubt, in this conference, but also try and go a step further and influence others, help them move forward, gradually build that connectivity. And who's to say that one day we couldn't have 250 acres of wildlife-rich garden on block in given communities? That's quite possible. And those will be probably some of the most biodiverse parts of that countryside.
Okay, well that's good. And the idea of the neighbour thing, I'm already on that.
Well done.
But yes, anyway. Okay, another question. So it's sort of talking on the plant thing then. So again, does everything have to be centred around native plants or native plant communities?
Yeah, tricky one. For me, in the main, yes, it does, because most of our invertebrates and fungi, etc., will be affiliated to certain plant species. Having said that, in my garden situation, I do have obviously non-native plants because they are brilliant attractants for butterflies and moths and bees, etc. But yes, in a natural situation, we will encourage the removal of rhododendron, laurel, obviously things like Japanese knotweed, etc. Yeah. That would be part of an intervention to kickstart the recovery of a natural, healthy, functioning ecosystem. So yes, generally speaking, I'm afraid that is the case.
Okay, that's
well,
good.
I'm not afraid, that is the case. Sorry.
Well, I'm sure it's going to come up later through the course of the next 2 days, because that is always the big debate, native or non-native. Yeah. Okay, you talked about the key principles of rewilding, and you talked about it being a marathon with a sprint start. Okay, so just a little bit more basically on what are some of those kickstarts. Can you just kind of exemplify a little bit more of that?
Well, typically with a lot of these projects, the first start is to remove intensive grazing pressure and inputs of chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, etc. That's a given that you more or less, you've got to start with that. You've got to remove what existing pressures there are. And that's actually the great thing about the rewilding projects, is that from day one, if they're going to go and do this properly, all those inputs stop day one. They're not gradually phasing them out over a decade. They're stopping straight away. Yeah. And that's a massive step forward in its own right. But so removing grazing pressure straight away, thus allowing natural regeneration. Let's see what comes. And in those first few years, you'll see how effective that is or not. And then you decide if you need to intervene more with planting, etc. Unless you're in a very barren landscape and it's obvious that planting will be needed. Disturbing the soil in the absence of, as we said, wild boar and other species. Disturbing the soil, so maybe literally scarifying areas to allow more seed to germinate in what was previously thick sward. Yeah. Those are the sorts of things that will often be the first interventions.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question. When doing new tree or shrub planting, do you mimic the planting patterns of a natural regenerated forest, or can you plant in straight lines?
Ideally the first, but if you take the Broughton example that I gave, 250,000 trees, you cannot do that randomly in the space of time that you've got. And what we did there was screefing, which scrapes a strip of turf and folds it on itself, and then they plant into the bare scrape strip. That's done by a machine. And that machine has to go in roughly straight lines. And the planting, because you're talking about such a number of trees, that has to be done quickly. So people have to be walking quickly, and some guy bragged to me that he reckoned he could do 10 in a minute, which is unbelievable. But these are whip, spade, and you're going really fast along these lines. But big schemes, you unfortunately will be doing them in straightish lines. What we did there is we followed the contours. So we wiggled, the lines are wiggly, but it's a machine doing the screefing. What is a really important aside from this is that technique has enabled the trees to get away really quickly, planting into the screefed earth. So we haven't had to do any maintenance at all. Okay. 2 years in, no maintenance, no spraying, no clearing. The trees have got away, and they're above the guards in many places. Deer tubes 1.2 meters high from tiny whips in 18 months. So that ground preparation actually means that you're reducing the amount of activity later. So, yeah, it's tough when you're dealing with big projects, and by their nature, these are often big projects.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. What legislation would you like to see happen, or that you think is good, or that needs more of a kickstart to support rewilding? What needs to happen in that regard?
Okay, well, tomorrow we're issuing a press release on this, actually. So the Future Farming Scheme, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, is potentially really good news, because it's going to reward farmers for producing public goods, reducing flood risk, better biodiversity, storing more carbon, water quality, etc. That is exactly what rewilding does. Rewilding delivers those public goods because it's restoring a healthy, functioning ecosystem. So we are battling hard to try to ensure that what they call the landscape recovery component of this scheme, that's the sort of top tier, if you like, of the Future Farming Scheme, is well funded. If that is well funded, that will make a massive difference, because there's lots of landowners ready, willing and able to do that. Now, that's mainly a rural situation. In an urban situation, I'm on the London Rewilding Task Force, which the Mayor set up. In an urban situation, what I would like to see is some of the urban parks, parts of some of the big urban parks being far less formal. Okay, so, you know, big parks like Hyde Park and Regent's Park, etc. Areas which are replicating as far as you can rewilding principles. Then river corridors strategically rewilded in the same way, wherever space allows, so connecting through the cities and towns. Old golf courses, so I'm involved in Alastair Park in Derby, which is now, was a golf course, is now going to be a rewilding site. That's in a city boundary. Wow. So taking opportunities reactively, opportunistically, like that, and then round the urban fringe, again seeking this more strategic planning for rewilding areas in urban fringe, connected along the river corridors into cities. There are at the moment very few in the way of planning strategies which are looking at that properly. So that's another key area for towns and cities.
No more golf, sorry.
You can still play golf.
I'm joking.
Not everywhere.
I'm afraid we're out of time, which is a real shame, because obviously this is what's going to be the issue, wanting to speak to every speaker forever. So can we just give Professor Dr. Thank you.
Thank you very much.